Welcome, everyone. This is Eric L. Dunavant, the Mindset Disruption Strategist. We are here for another episode of Redefining Success. And joining me today is Allan Draper. He's a serial entrepreneur, which I already love because that's me too. An investor, a business growth expert, and then an attorney. So I'm going to be more, you don't meet many attorneys who are serial entrepreneurs or business growth experts. So I want to know more about what's going on. So Allan, thank you so much for joining me for the show.
Yeah, grateful to be here.
Hey, Allan, before we kind of dig in, I'd love for you just tell my audience a little bit about you outside of business, because we'll talk about business as we go through the show here today.
Yeah, so I'm very involved in my faith and with my family. I spend a lot of time volunteering through my church and in my community. I've been married for coming up on 16 years.
Nice.
And we have 3 kids, a 10-year-old boy named Maddox, an 8-year-old boy named Jackson, and a 4-year-old girl named Olivia. And they're right at those ages where they're playing a bunch of sports, are involved a lot in their school. And so that's keeping us really busy. My boys are actually playing 2 sports each right now. And my daughter's playing her first year of soccer. My wife's coaching the soccer team. I'm helping with my 10-year-old boy's baseball team. And a lot of times people will look at me and they'll think I'm younger than I am. So I'm going to be 43, and not that that's old or anything, but my oldest son is 10. I didn't have a child till I was almost 33. And they keep us busy. And I'm kind of, the nice thing about being older when you have kids is I feel like, not that you're ever really prepared until you do it. It's a lot like business in that way, but I feel like we have a really good mindset about the moments, the hard moments, and trying to enjoy those and appreciate them, because I know they'll be gone too soon.
Oh, yeah. No, they definitely will. As someone who is sitting on the other side of that and launching my last one in the next few years, hold on to each and every one of those moments. Sounds like you've got a good balance, though, of being able to, if you're juggling that many activities and doing business, you found a good way to balance it.
Balance is such an interesting word. And Rory Vaden wrote a book, and in that book, I'm trying to remember what it was, Procrastinate on Purpose. And great book. And he talks about this idea of the focused imbalance. And what he means by that is it's really hard to achieve high levels of success with doing everything equally. And I know that's not what people mean when they say balance. I know that's not what they mean, but I love having an opportunity to chat about my focus and my strategy. And that is, when I'm at work, like I'm talking to you right now, Eric. Yeah. I'm talking to you. Right. Like my kids, as much as I love them, they don't exist right now. Right. If something were to happen, obviously they would, but that's the focused imbalance. So I'll go through periods. I travel quite a bit for work. I just in Vegas for 4 days with a sales team last weekend. That was my focus. And a lot of times people think balance means equal, and balance does not mean equal. Not if you're trying to achieve success in any area of your life. Yeah. But the short answer, that's the long answer. The short answer is I do it with people. I surround myself with incredible staff and partners, and they allow me to scale businesses while focusing on the day-to-day.
That's so good. What are you passionate about most right this second?
In terms of business?
Yeah. Or, I guess anything, but it's probably in business. What are you passionate about the most?
My focus is really on 2 things right now. It's my own current startups, which 2 big ones right now. I'm developing a software in the home service industry, and I launched a digital marketing agency about a year and a half ago called Lizard SEM. That's really starting to take off. So those 2 things kind of in one category. So my startups, and then I'm getting a lot more into angel investing.
So one of the things that I saw when I was looking on your website was this idea of thriving business. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means to you?
Yeah, the funny thing is that it's a lot like relationships, where it's different. Like something that might work for my kid at school is going to be different than somebody else's. Just because there's so many things that come into play. And it's the same thing with what it means for somebody's business to thrive. My businesses have to be doing at least 1.5 to 2 times revenue every year for me to say that they're thriving.
Yeah.
I have to be dang near doubling my business every year. I have my first startup that wasn't real estate related was a pest control company of all things. I moved from Phoenix. I was practicing law. I came home one day and I told my wife, hey, Jules, I'm actually going to quit the law. And she's like, okay. And I said, and I'm going to become a bug guy. I'm going to start a pest control company. And she's like, okay. And then I said, oh yeah. And we're moving from Phoenix to Detroit.
Oh, really?
And she's like, oh. And at the time we had a 4-month-old and a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
And like the craziest thing is it took a second to process, not very long. And she's like, let's do it. I believe in you. And, so that company, that's Proof Pest Control, started in Detroit in 2015. We're well over 8 figures and we almost double every year. And so for me, that's what a thriving business means. However, some people, I was talking to an attorney yesterday that was asking, I also own a law firm. I'm named partner in a law firm, but I don't practice law anymore. But I had this attorney who I went to law school with, and I was chatting with her yesterday, and her idea of a thriving business is so wildly different than mine. And that's okay.
Yeah.
She wanted to hang a shingle, do her own thing, not have employees, be more of a solo entrepreneur. And that's completely fine. So when I'm helping businesses identify who they are and who they want to become, one of my first questions is like, hey, where do you want to be in 5 years? And how do we get you there? And it's different for pretty much anybody. But for me, Eric, if I'm going to start a business, I am going to scale that business.
Allan, what was it that gave you the bug, so to speak, to leave? Talk a little bit more about how do you leave law to go do a bug business in Detroit of all places?
Yeah. What's funny is that very few people understood, but the people that understood the least, I remember I was at lunch probably a month before I left with a bunch of my law school buddies. There were probably 6 or 8 of us. Yeah. And I'm like, hey guys, so I'm quitting the law firm and I'm, doing this thing. And they couldn't believe it. And I think they couldn't believe it because they were shoulder to shoulder with me through law school, through the bar exam, through all of that like pain and turmoil. Yeah. And so they just didn't get it. But back in 2006, before I went to law school, I worked for a pest control company in Columbus, Ohio. Okay. And my brother Brent was a door-to-door salesman for that company. And he was really good at it. And in door-to-door sales, you can make a lot of money if you don't care about people slamming the door in your face and you have a good work ethic. And I'm talking really good money. Yeah. So I went out there. He tells me like, hey, let's, you handle the operation side. I'll handle the sales side. And let's start our own company after the summer. And it fell apart. We couldn't get along. We didn't have the capital. We weren't mature enough. He sticks with it. So the entire time I ended up going to work for a bank. Then I went to law school. Then I practiced law. That entire time, probably 7, 8 years, he stuck with it, had a company of his own. And then about 2 or 3 years into my law practice, he was exiting one of his pest control companies. And I went to him, I'm like, man, maybe now's the time. And the rest is history, as they say.
What has been maybe some of the biggest obstacles as you've transitioned from being more kind of a practicing attorney to more of an entrepreneur business growth kind of focus? What have kind of been some of the obstacles you've hit along the way?
The interesting thing about obstacles is I think the obstacles always match your level of progress. So early on, your obstacles are going to be, paying the bills, which that I shouldn't undermine that or belittle that, because that's a really big thing. But when you're first starting out, that's like, it feels like it's, it's the end of the world.
Yeah.
And then as time goes on, it becomes like more emotional things, like right now I have 17 business partners.
Mm.
I own 27 businesses. I'm an angel investor, so that doesn't include businesses where I'm heavily invested in pre-seed rounds. But right now, one of my biggest challenges is working with my partners,
Mm.
and it's not just getting along with them. It's matching interests.
Mm.
And before it was like, hey, I don't know if we have enough money to survive, which that was emotional, but not emotional like partners, because my partners become my best friends.
Yeah.
And it's something I can, if I have to call a vendor and say, hey, a payment's going to be delayed, I have no problem, Eric, sleeping at night. No problem.
Right.
If I have to call a partner and say, hey, it's not working out, or, they're calling me to tell me that, it's a much more emotional, conversation. And at the end of the day, recently I've been talking a lot about my partners, and I've been talking a lot about legacy. And I think my professional legacy is not going to be how I do professionally or in business. I think my track record at this point, to some degree, speaks for itself. Yeah. But I think my ultimate legacy is going to be how well my partners do. And so right now, those are the challenges, that the big ones that are on my mind. Obviously I start 2 businesses every year. And so startup challenges, but those are things that I've done before.
Yeah.
I have a business that is, I'm pulling the plug on in the next couple of weeks. It's just lost too much money, and, there's those things. But I think the further I get in business, the more value I place on relationships, especially with my partners.
Yeah.
And because I place so much value, that's where I experience most of my trials and challenges.
So I think this would be important if you're willing to kind of have the discussion. What are some of the lessons that you've learned about, because there are those relationships and sometimes business just doesn't work. What are some of the lessons you've learned in having to kind of transition some of those as you go through it? Maybe you're still learning today, but what does that look like for you?
That's such a fantastic question. And I think you have to have a certain level of experience to understand the significance of that question. Because for me, the line between, did I give this business or this partnership everything I have before pulling the plug, it is very blurry. It's a very gray area. So this company that I'm talking about, I've had the majority interest for a couple of years now. And I think I struggle with that question. Like, hey, did I give it everything? And maybe I'm really close to turning the corner with this business. I just don't know it.
Yeah.
So what I'm basing it on is year over year numbers, gross profit, like how much am I profiting after, it cost me, the cost to do the service, things like that. But I think as human beings, the unknown is what scares us more than anything. And when deciding to pull the plug on a business to cut your losses, as an accountant would say, or a CFO, it's so difficult because you don't know. You don't know. And it's a lot like gambling. Like, if you're at the roulette wheel, and you've been playing black all night and it's just not working out for you, that next spin could be red. But it's like, but you have to weigh the options. I think the big consideration is, what is it preventing me from doing? What else could I be doing with my resources? Not necessarily, am I going to be able to turn the corner on this business, but what is, my focus and my monetary resources being tied up in this venture? What would that allow me to do if I did cut my losses with it? And that's what I try to focus on. And when I do make the decision, Eric, I think this is the key. You don't look back.
Yeah.
You don't look back. You don't ask what if. You don't stay around the roulette wheel and see what the next spin is. You leave. You're gone and you're doing something else. And I think regardless of the decision, you either win or you learn.
No, that's good. That's good. Allan, you were talking about, so you started out, when you started the pest control business, that was just you, right? That was just you running the business, no business partners?
Nope, that was my brother. My brother Brent and I started it together 50-50.
Okay, the one that was in Detroit.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So what did you learn? So that's one partner. What, I guess along the way too, what have you learned, maybe even in the successful businesses, what is it like to have multiple businesses and multiple partners? And like, what did you think it was going to be like versus kind of what it's real, what are kind of some of the lessons you've learned as you've transitioned into that type of mode?
There's a bunch that I've learned. I've learned probably more about being a partner than I've learned about business. And I actually think that's the more important of the two. Right off the top, being a business partner is a lot like a marriage. You just, and my trick to marriage is, it's not Hollywood and everything's, rainbows and sunshine. It's stuff happens, and you have to decide every day, hey, we're just going to work at it again.
Yeah.
And it's the exact same in a partnership, regardless of what happens. And when I look for a partner, I look for somebody, and it's hard to tell sometimes. And I've failed with some partners. I've failed for probably 4 or 5, maybe more. But you look for somebody that is going to have that same attitude, where it's like, hey, this isn't going to be rainbows and sunshine. A lot of times it's going to be really hard work. But the one thing that won't happen is I will not give up. And so I think that's a really important aspect of it. I think another really important lesson that I'm really starting to learn right now, as I'm trying to retain some of these relationships, is that just because I have a vision or an interest in a company doesn't mean that my partner shares that vision. And that's okay. I have a lot of partners that their only business is their business with me. So my partner, Matt, is my partner with my digital marketing agency, and he runs the day-to-day. That's his only business.
Yeah.
So it would be really messed up of me to say, hey, this is one of my 27 current businesses. I start 2 a year, and this is how it's going to be. So what I try to do is I try to get motivated, talented people that aren't going to give up, and I try to let them help craft the vision. And of course, kind of going back to the first part of our conversation, I'm going to want that person to scale the business. But beyond that, I want them to take it in their direction. So that's kind of the second thing, is that allowing my partners to take companies in the way that they want to do that, as long as the general principles match up with mine. And then I think the third big thing is the value of people. And this applies to everybody within my companies, but especially partners. I didn't catch that early on. And I remember when somebody would come ask me for a raise, I'd almost always decline them and, think I could just find somebody else. And it just takes so much time and money and training to get people caught up. And a lot of times, just like somebody that's quitting thinks the grass is greener, so does the employer. Like, oh, they're leaving. Oh, I'm going to find somebody better. Right. And I've just been through it 50 or 60 times. And I've realized, when you have somebody that's good, whether it's a partner, a manager, a base level employee, you scratch and claw to keep them.
Yeah. Yeah. How many businesses do you think that you can manage and own? Are you still finding your capacity?
No, I don't. So I'm getting more into passive ventures. And I don't really manage any of them.
Okay.
So I'm involved on the growth side, and I'll be involved in status calls or strategy meetings. But my goal, I could see myself being a large owner of at least 100 companies. Wow. I'm not stopping.
Do you have a niche that you really enjoy more than another?
The funny thing is that I enjoy the diversity.
Oh.
So I'm really good at home services. I have a podcast called the Bug Bucks Podcast. And we're building some businesses within Bug Bucks and the pest control category.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I've been involved in that industry for about a decade. So I know quite a bit about that, but I got to the point where I wasn't growing. It just felt like I was, going to work and, doing my thing. And now I'm developing a software, and I have a call in, 15, 20 minutes with my software partner.
Yeah.
And he talks about stuff, and I'm not kidding. Like, he'll probably listen to this, but while he's talking, I'm Googling the terms that he's using so I can learn about that industry. He's usually, saying words that I don't understand. He's not doing it to, offend me or whatever, make me feel like I don't know what I'm talking about. He's just biz talk.
Yeah.
So I really thrive in, at least personally, but financially, home services.
Okay.
And it's not a sexy industry. And I try not to get it out too much, but there are companies that absolutely crush it. And if it weren't for my pest control company, I would never be able to do what I'm doing today. But ultimately, I like the diversity. I like making myself uncomfortable and getting into new areas that I have to learn something about.
Your children are at such an incredible age right now. How have you been able to use this to kind of teach them about business and what's possible for the future?
It's funny because I think a lot of it is just in passing, where they'll come in, and like my daughter just to the right of me. So I'm in my office, but just to the right of me, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her leave for school, but she kind of glanced over, and I have these huge lights and my microphone set up. And so I try to let them approach me on their schedule. So I could see her like saying, she's 4. So saying, Daddy, I like those lights. And sometimes she'll come and she'll like sit on my chair and she'll start singing into the microphone and stuff. So that's kind of my method right now. My 10-year-old's starting to get a little more curious. We talk a lot about money. I'm trying to teach him the value of money and things like that. And they talk a lot about, both my sons want to be professional baseball players. And I talk to them all the time about, hey, what can you do to do that and achieve that? And then I always hear them say, but if I don't make it, I'm going to work for you, Dad. The thing is, what they don't realize is that they're going to start at the bottom.
Yeah.
Just like I did. But, I think I'm not trying to shove anything down their throats. I really just want them to pick it up at their pace, but I've noticed that they're getting a lot more interested in what I do.
That's cool. Is there, Allan, we're gonna run out of time here real quick. Is there anything you didn't get to share, or I didn't ask you, that you wanted to make sure that you got to share?
I mean, it's weird because I've been reading business books and listening to seminars and, for over 20 years, probably 25 years. And a lot of it is so cliche, and it's, hey, don't give up. It's get your mind right, focus on what you want to achieve. And I heard it so much, and I started to think it was cliche. And now that I've seen some things that have helped me become successful, I realize that most of that stuff is true.
Yeah.
And so for the people that are getting started, I would just beg them to not discount something just because it sounds cliche or cheesy. Yeah. Like, I always thought, like, I'm like, that's just weird. Like, don't, I spend every morning, I spend 10, 15 minutes focusing on what it feels like to have already achieved a specific goal. And I change the goal every day. And before, I didn't really give that any credit. And now I'm like, those are the things that have allowed me to succeed.
Beautiful. And
so why reinvent the wheel? So for the listener, it's ultimately this idea that, you just go after it. At the end of the day, they did these studies, right, with these hospice nurses, and they found out that the number one regret that people had on their deathbed wasn't that they had done something and screwed up. It was that they didn't try. And it's just not how I want to live. So for the people that are scared, I say, go for it. And as I mentioned before, you're either going to win or you're going to learn.
Yeah. I love that. I love that phrase. Allan, if people want to get in touch with you, follow the work that you're doing, anything like that, what's the best way to do that?
My website, allandraper.com. There's a link there to schedule a 15-minute chat with me if they're wanting to start a business or they've started and they're trying to scale it. I'm always looking for investments. 90% of them don't match with what I'm trying to do, but I still don't mind, putting them on, giving them a thought or two about what I would do if I were them. And then my Instagram, I'm really active on Instagram. It's Allan R. Draper.
Okay. Aallan for those of you who are listening. Just make sure you don't. And then Draper, Draper. Allan, thank you so much for being here. We've reached the end of the show. My last question is always the same. So I'm excited to hear your answer. In 3 generations, what do you hope your great-grandchildren remember about you?
Yeah, so I was trying to, put this in perspective to make it more practical. But whether it's reading or seeing videos or whatever it is, I think I would want them to know that I did hard things, that I sought out discomfort for personal growth, so that I, ultimately that I traded in comfort for growth, and hopefully that trickles down. And then that's every aspect of life. That's not just professional life or financial. That's, with your relationships, and relationships are hard sometimes.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you trade comfort for growth and sticking with things. And I think that's the lesson I would want them to know about, my life.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you kind of letting us step into your world and the way that you're doing that with your businesses, and just kind of sharing even how hard it is sometimes to make a choice on shutting one down, man. That's a hard place to be, but thank you for kind of sharing that with us. I know it's really valuable. And thank you for being here, Allan. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, everyone, we will be with you again next time. Thank you so much for being here. God bless you. Have a fantastic day.